A very big welcome and a huge thank you to Cody. Coming up, we are welcoming back for an amazing pinch hit. Cody's career as a writer has taken her on many adventures, including the Fist stage. Originally from Phoenix, we will forgive her. She is a graduate of the University of Arizona's Journalism School and spent over a decade living on the East Coast in Washington, D.C. and New York City before deciding she was just too cold and returned to Tucson to thaw out like the lizard she always has been at heart. Her traveling companion is an incredibly weird dog named Puddles who hates both the rain and the car. Please welcome back for a special appearance, Cody.
On the short side, so we're just gonna get this up. And yes, thank you so much for having me back. And it's great to tell this story again because actually the first time I told this story was a huge cathartic moment for me. And there's actually a moment in the story you'll hear when I'm writing it because I sat down to write kind of reflecting on an experience that was very formative for me, but I hadn't really unpacked in a really long time. And then when I got the Fist prompt, I started writing it and then had this aha moment, which you'll hear in the story. So it's going to be great to tell it again. So this is my story called The Dragon. Somewhere along Interstate 70 is where I realized his mother was right. Juggling pins and bottles of kerosene were rolling around in the back of the van as I white-knuckled the steering wheel through the winding passageways of the Utah mountains. The dawn light illuminated the figure in the passenger seat beside me, a sleeping dragon. With my foot on the gas, I could still feel the sand in my shoes from the San Diego beach where I clapped from the sidelines as he performed his fire-breathing act. I had been driving all night, and before he folded up his wings and fell asleep, the dragon insisted we waste no time getting to our next stop in Denver. In my bleary-eyed, delirious state, his mother's voice from a few days earlier seemed to echo off the mountains. "Are you sure you want to do this? He's changed." Her voice trailed off, but her eyes told me she was serious. I was taken aback by her last-minute warning, but not actually concerned. At 22, I had zero interest in listening to mothers. I'd known her forever and assumed she was just being judgmental. Yeah, obviously, some things about him had changed since I first met him nearly a decade earlier as a dorky middle schooler. He was still as handsome and charismatic as ever, but his hair had grown long, and his appearance had slowly morphed into that of a musky, flip-flop-wearing hippie. I knew at some point he had dropped out of college for a while to live out of his van and learn circus tricks. Yet even with that interruption, he was obnoxiously smart enough that he still managed to graduate in 4 years, which is how we ended up reconnecting in the summer of 2009 when all the kids from the neighborhood ended up back at our parents' houses reevaluating our options after graduating in the height of the Great Recession. For some of our friends, those options included immediately getting married, which is where I first saw him again, as a groomsman looking uncomfortable wearing real shoes. It was a small religious ceremony without a formal reception, so afterwards, the rest of our high school friend group sauntered off to an unofficial backyard after party where we drank Bud Light and tested out our different answers to the inevitable question any recent grad is asked over and over again. So what are you up to now? That question made me want to spit fire back at anyone who asked me because I was exploding with ambition of wanting to be a professional writer, but trapped under the crushing weight of reality. Which is maybe why when the dragon swooped back into my life, I was so drawn to his flames once again. All the wedding guests oohed and awed as he lit up the sky, juggling fire in his rented tuxedo, extinguishing each torch with his mouth before the grand finale where he chugged back liquid kerosene and sprayed fire 10 feet out of his mouth. It was beautiful, terrifying, and way cooler than anything that anyone else had going on. So I felt special when it was me he walked over to afterwards and said, "We could just leave here, you know, just go. I know you're always up for an adventure." And that's where we hatched the plan, a cross-country road trip blogging and busking across America in pursuit of our respective dreams. It felt like if we just drove towards something, then maybe it would all work out, that forward motion was better than no motion at all. At the very least, it'd be something to write about, I told myself, like Jack Kerouac. A montage of American road trip cliches flickered through my mind. Wind blowing through our hair with the windows rolled down, 1970s rock songs playing on the radio, perhaps making out a little bit as we parked the van next to a scenic overlook. All the classics. But wait, I'd been down this road before, outlining the story in my mind before it happened. Just days before departing for college, I had written him a letter confessing I had feelings for him and just needed to tell him before we went our separate ways. I admit I wanted him to stand outside my window with the boombox like John Cusack, but the feelings were not mutual, and we basically decided to pretend it never happened. Perhaps I did it at the last minute anyways because I thought it was good for the plot. I knew we were out of time, and I didn't really expect to see him again or actually deal with the implications of my confession. But here we were again discussing our road trip plans. I decided to lower my romantic expectations and decided that at the very least, I'd get to spend the summer with one of my childhood best friends. Plus, I had nothing better going on, and running away and joining the circus wasn't the worst way to spend the summer. We set off from Phoenix in his stinky blue minivan, zipping westward to California first because we wanted to stick our feet in both oceans. As we ran down the beach together at sunset towards the Pacific Ocean, I felt like I was embarking on the adventure of a lifetime. But on our second day, I sat in a boardwalk cafe to work on my travel blog while the dragon flew off somewhere, returning hours later with a tattoo in his foot that said, "Manifest." Okay. Odd. I thought it was weird he didn't invite me to come with him since we stuck our feet in the ocean together, but whatever. Assuming he wanted to include me in any of his plans was my first mistake. And the second was that I allowed him to schedule our pit stops because he told me he reached out to friends in various places we could stay with. Okay, sounds great, I said, brushing away the vision of us curled up in the back of the van together, camping under the stars. Sure, staying with friends makes sense. Well, little did I know, this dude had a hoe in every area code. And we were traveling through the phone book. If you want to know what heartbreak sounds like, it's not the louder and more obvious sounds of your childhood crush screwing the girl in the other room. It's really the quiet sounds that stick with you. Laying in a sleeping bag in an apartment hallway and being close enough to the door that you can hear the rustle of the plastic garbage bag as the condom wrapper is tossed in. Somewhere along the way, he had indeed changed. And not just in his sexual escapades, which were humiliating for me to have a front row seat to, but that alone I could handle. Girls had always thrown themselves at him, and I was used to my role as the best friend. What I couldn't handle as the days and the miles wore on was being constantly made to feel stupid and uninteresting. He had become brash, unwilling to listen, uninterested in any ideas that weren't his own, covered in a thick layer of scales. Gone was the teenage boy I once knew who asked me questions, who was vulnerable, who I could talk to for hours, who once called me to come over and help him hang up a picture in his bedroom wall because he didn't know how to hold a hammer. I was always good at that kind of stuff. Tools, building things, being unafraid to punch a hole in the wall, doing stuff the boys could do. And maybe that's why I never had any luck dating them. Our trip had quickly morphed from the mutual adventure I was expecting to an outright sprint, as the dragon was determined to get from warm bed to warm bed as fast as possible, even if it meant driving in shifts for 15 hours straight. The travel blog I'd started dissolved into nothing because I was experiencing nothing but the inside of that smelly van and the occasional pitch stop to watch him juggle. I'd learned not to push back on our itinerary, afraid of getting burned. I had never been the girl who let people push me around, yet somehow with him I let my voice be quenched. Arriving in New York City was supposed to be the climax of our trip, but what was left of our friendship continued to shrink against the skyscrapers. We decided to split up for a bit, returning with selfies taken in front of our respective dream jobs. Me in front of the New York Times building, him in front of the Coney Island Freak Show. They have a world-class sword-swallowing act, I'm told. We didn't run into the Atlantic Ocean together like we had with the Pacific, but experienced that separately too. His other foot now bandaged from a second tattoo that said, "Destiny. Manifest destiny." That is what he tattooed across his feet. This white man from Scottsdale actually had the audacity to do that. To brand himself with the words of colonizers as an idiotic metaphor for this road trip. As if the land, which was never ours to begin with, was something he conquered in his minivan simply by passing through at 70 miles an hour. I think we would have both preferred if this is where the scene could have faded to black and our story be over, but we were stuck thousands of miles from home, so we just kept driving. And it didn't really matter if we were in North Carolina or Alabama or Texas. The country I actually wanted to explore and write about just turned to ash in our wake. We drove westward, mostly in silence along the I-10 until we hit Tucson, just hours from our original starting point, where he declared, "Close enough," tossed me the keys, and said, "Go on without me, I'll make my way back," seemingly unable to stand being around me a minute longer. I obeyed, drove the van back to Phoenix, parked it in his mom's driveway, where she looked at me with a "told you so," as I tossed her the keys. And that was the last time I saw him. And I was pissed off, but comforted by the fact that I would now be able to completely remove him from my life. But every time he looked down at those awful tattoos representing his journey across America, he would have to remember the girl who paid for half the gas. I pictured those problematic tattoos sticking out of the end of bed sheets where he would lay with his latest conquest as she asked how he got them, and he would have to think of me, even as I knew he would edit me out of the story. As the years went on and my burns from the dragon faded and healed, it's actually his mother I think about the most often, not just because of her prophecy before our trip, but for what she said to me back at that wedding where we reconnected. She leaned over a church pew to hug me, and as she pulled me close, she whispered in my ear, "I'm so proud of you, I always knew." What? I said, pulling away. "Your photo. I saw it in the newspaper." Apparently, a photo of me at a gay bar had been splashed across the homepage of azcentral.com during Pride Month. I actually was just there with a group of friends on a bar crawl, and when a reporter asked to take my picture, me, with my unused journalism degree, was like, if this is as close as I can get to being in the paper, sure. But even though I hadn't come to terms with it at that particular moment, this ironic foreshadowing became more and more hilarious over time as her son would indeed be the last boy to break my heart. After that road trip ended, I did eventually go on to be a professional writer and work in a skyscraper in New York. And the dragon did indeed go on to be a professional circus performer. Living all over the world, he continued to blaze through. But years later, after finally looking him up on Instagram, I'd learned that those revenge fantasies where I pictured him explaining the tattoos to his lovers wouldn't actually be other women. He was into swallowing swords of a different kind now. How did we miss this about each other? How did we miss this about ourselves? This revelation, along with my own, slammed on the brakes in my mind. My memory of our time in the van now zooming in reverse. Backwards from where I left him in Tucson. Backwards to the endless expanse of Texas where tears ran streaming down my face unacknowledged. Backwards to that New Orleans cafe where the waiter innocently assumed we were a couple. "She's not my girlfriend," he fired off. "I know," I snapped back at him. Years of rejection from him and others boiling inside of me, feeling unpretty, unworthy, unable to make any relationship click. But it makes me feel like shit. The mere idea is so offensive to you. The smoke of his performance cleared for just a moment as he said, "It's because that's all you've ever wanted from me." It was maybe the only honest thing we'd ever said to each other over the decade of crossed wires, caring about each other in all the wrong ways at all the wrong times, drawn to each other because we both knew we were different, but unable to find a word for that. Not lovers, not even friends, simply fellow travelers. And I hope that at some point along his journey, his mother also pulled her son close and told him the same thing she once whispered to me. "I'm proud of you. I always knew."